Hello again, friends. Welcome to week 3 of 5225, 52 weeks of loving movies. The challenge this week was to watch movies by directors who were 25 years of age or younger when they made the films. I had a lot of fun revisiting an old favorite, a film that has grown on me, a prestigious one that I'd never seen, and a second time watch of a more recent film. And stick around to the end for a little bonus entry. The first movie I watched this week was a film that is extremely important to me, and that's Clerks. It is directed by Kevin Smith at the age of 23. The history of this film is well documented, so I'm not going to bore you with that too much. There's plenty of information out there for the history of how this was made and Kevin Smith's stories. He's an incredible storyteller, so he's definitely gone over that. But I will tell you about my history with it and why it's so important to me. Clerks was a movie that I had heard a lot about, but had never actually seen when I started working in the video store when I was 17 years old. With sudden access to all the free rentals I could handle, I pretty much immediately rented. In fact, it was actually one of the first movies I rented after I started working there. I think I rented it because it was my first retail job, and I thought it might have something to say that I needed to hear. And boy, did it, but not the one I thought I would hear. Clerks was a revelation to me, and it taught me something new about film and what film could be. Okay, so maybe I will talk a little bit about the film's history for just a second, because this is exactly the kind of realization that got Clerks made in the first place. Kevin Smith saw Richard Linklater's Slacker, and it, like Clerks with me, opened his eyes to what a film could be. Like Smith, I too wanted to go out and start making movies. I never achieved that dream. Poor me. And even though the film didn't get me down the same path, it did do so much for me in my film journey, in my journey as a film lover. It taught me to seek out different voices, not just the ones with the money and the studio backing, but the films being made by people like me, the films that were saying things that big budget films weren't saying. It taught me to find truth in art. It taught me to love film on a whole new level. And of course, it taught me the lyric to Berserker. My love for you is like a truck berserker. Would you like some making fuck? Berserker. I'm sorry about that. As far as reviewing this movie itself, I don't think I'm capable of being objective about this film anymore. It's a part of me, and it likely always will be. So I'm not really going to go into that, but I just wanted to talk about kind of the importance of this film to me, because it can't be overstated how important this film to me. I know that modern audiences look at something like this and maybe it doesn't hold up for them, or some of them it does, and some of them, could, because after this and some other movies had come out, there was this big independent boom, and so maybe this didn't end up being quite as special for some people because they had so much to choose from back then. But for me, seminal movie. It absolutely helped create the person that I am today. The next film I watched was 1991's Boyz N the Hood, directed by John Singleton at the age of 23. Now, my history with this film is kind of the opposite of my history with Clerks. I've always liked this movie, but as a white boy from rural Oklahoma, I couldn't properly receive this film upon watching it the first time. As I matured and sought new voices and gained understanding of cultures outside of my own, it has grown on my heart. I can tell you today that this is one of the most authentic coming of age stories ever put to celluloid. And I'm a massive fan of coming of age movies. It's an authenticity I couldn't see in my youth because it was not something I had lived. And I still haven't, obviously. But that's why diversity in the voices we hear is so important. Since then, I have listened to the voices through social media. I have heard the voices through movies and books. We still have a long way to go, but that presence and the focus on seeking out that presence has improved the way I see the world, and I believe it has improved the world itself. So if you've never seen Boyz N the Hood, I encourage you to seek it out. As I mentioned, the authenticity is off the charts, but there's so much that it has to say about how it is, what it's like growing up in a place that the world has forgotten or the world is trying to change. And it says a lot about what sometimes you only see on the news the worst parts of a community or the most tragic things happening in a community. But this points out like some of the people within the community and what they are doing, and that's still true today. So if you've never seen this movie, please seek it out. It's an incredible coming of age story, and has some really incredible things to say with some great performances. The third film I watched was the only first time watch for me, and it was a doozy. In 2002, the film community was shocked when, for the first time since 1962, the Sight and Sound Greatest Films of All Time list was not topped by Citizen Kane or Vertigo. Instead, the number one movie was one that most of them had never seen or even heard of, which was the case for a lot of people. That film was, and I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to say it in as much as I can in its native language. I'm not going to say the numbers in their native language because that's harder for me. Jeanne Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1080, Bruxelles. I'm sorry to French people and people who speak French and any other language that my pronunciation may have said something offensive in that language. But that film, I'm going to call it Jeanne Dielman for the remainder of this of this video. Jeanne Dielman was directed by Chantal Anne Ackerman. I said that in my accent, so I'm sure it was wrong too. At the age of 24, and it instantly went on a million must-watch lists, including mine. 3 years later, I still hadn't seen it, and for good reason. It's a daunting task. A nearly 4-hour movie that's largely made up of long static shots of the titular Jeanne Dielman going through her daily routine over 3 days, including cooking, cleaning, shopping, eating, bathing, and all the things that are normally just cut out of a movie unless they are intrinsic to the plot of the film. The one break in the monotony that we get is when Dielman will receive a gentleman caller who will pay her for sex. This part of her day is mostly hidden from us, the audience. It's just part of her daily routine. And to focus on the titillating parts would undermine the intentional monotony of the picture. Because here's the thing. This is a boring movie, but I was never bored. I was fascinated. I don't really understand what it is about the movie that held my focus so well. I'm sure there's some sort of a movie science that could explain this. I just don't know what it is. If someone out there does have a PhD in movie sciences, I'm sure that's real. Please let me know why I'm so fascinated by this monotony. One of the most interesting aspects of this film is that on day 2, something happens off screen that is not mentioned by any of the characters that begins to disrupt her daily routine. Not in a major way, but little things start changing a little bit. Not telling the audience what this event is, or even that there was an event, keeps us exactly where Chantal Ackerman wants us. She wants us to experience this as Dielman does, because Jeanne doesn't know that anything has changed for her. In fact, we only know that this event happened in the film because Ackerman said it did. Outside of the film. I'm being very selective with my words here because I do think even though the event doesn't technically happen in the film or on screen or mentioned in any way, I do think it is important for first-time viewers not to know what it is when they watch it. The thing with this film is that I have so many thoughts running in my head, and I thought I would have them in an order that would be easily digestible and for me to be able to speak them to you by the time I got to filming, because this has been days. I've been digesting this film, but they have just evolved. The thoughts in my head have just evolved into more thoughts and deeper thoughts and other things, and I haven't quite been able to file them properly yet. So I think this is one that I am going to have to revisit at a future date, and I'm excited to get to revisit, especially knowing the things I found out after I had watched it the first time, and do another review then with maybe some more succinct thoughts and maybe some conclusions that I have drawn from, and maybe an answer to why I'm so fascinated by the monotony in this movie. I mean, obviously it's number one. There's a reason I'm not the only one, but I'm interested. I'm very fascinated by why I'm so fascinated. The thing I can say right now is that I think this is a masterpiece. I think this absolutely deserves the #1 spot on the Sight and Sound list that it got, and it should be seen by more people if they can handle the pacing. The pacing is going to be an issue for a lot of people because, as I said, it's intentionally boring. And not boring in a way that and as I mentioned, I was never bored by it, but it is intentionally boring because it is showing the monotony of her life. And so I think that more people should see it as long as they are prepared for that. If you're going in not prepared for that, or if you know you can't handle it, I fear that it's going to leave a sour taste in your mouth, and you may not be able to properly accept the movie as it is. That doesn't mean don't watch it. That just means that's just a fair warning for you if you are wanting to dive into this film. I'm going to move on to the final film I watched for this theme, and it was a rewatch. And both times I watched it solely due to my friend and Frame Wreck co-host Dylan Randazzo. The film is 2021's Cha Cha Real Smooth, directed by Cooper Raiff when he was 25 years old. Not just directed, though. It was written and produced and stars Cooper Raiff in the leading role. I first saw this film because Dylan had seen it at Sundance and raved about it. I recommend people go watch his Best of the Fest 2022 video on Dill Pickle Movie Network, because hearing him talk about it is a thing of beauty. I highly recommend it. Go watch it. Not right now after this video. Anyway, so I watched it on his glowing recommendation, and I really loved it. But then I kind of filed it into the back of my mind and didn't really think about it all that much afterward. That's not a fault of the movie. There's just a lot of movies that come out, and sometimes things get filed to the back. But it was in my top 12, I think, of 2022. So I definitely really, really liked it, but I hadn't revisited it and hadn't really thought about going back and watching it. And then recently I was having a conversation with Dylan about this theme, and he reminded me, hey, Cooper Raiff was only 25 when he made Cha Cha Real Smooth. So even though I wasn't going to watch this for this, I did put it on the list. And then eventually I decided, I guess I'll watch this one. Because there were other movies on the list. This one kind of, I kept remembering that I'd seen this, and it kind of raised it up the list for me. There's something really magical about a young artist who tells a very personal story. They aren't jaded or worried about the back end. They're just telling a story that they understand and that has a connection to them. And this is the thing, other than their ages, that connects all of these films that I've talked about today. Kevin Smith wanted to make a film about his friends and filmed it in the very stores that he worked at the time that he was writing and filming this. John Singleton made a movie about where he grew up and the struggles of an unjust world on his community. Chantal Ackerman made a movie celebrating her mother and the work that she put into every day. And here Cooper Raiff is telling a story about a 22-year-old dumbass, his words, which is something he understood. It's not just that, though. It's also based on a comment his mother made about raising his disabled sister. You can really feel how personal this film is to him, and that resonates with me because I feel like I know these characters. I do know these characters. I am some of these characters. And that closeness makes it extraordinarily easy to fall in love with these characters. I'm glad Dylan keeps encouraging me to watch this movie because I loved it more on rewatch than I did the first time. And I feel like it might stick in my mind a little bit more this time because there's just so much I really love about this. And it reminded me how much I loved it back then. And I found new things. So if you've never seen Cha Cha Real Smooth, I recommend it. It's got its detractors. There are people who call this a vanity project because he stars in it, wrote it, directed, stars in it. That's not new. That's an age-old tale. That's something that young artists do a lot. No one's upset that Van Gogh painted himself. Like it's something people do. They want a snapshot of their world, and sometimes they are the best ones to tell that story on screen and off. There's also, I've heard criticism from actually a very good friend of mine, had a criticism of that a 24-year-old could never know enough about the world to make a coming of age movie. I mean, tell that to John Singleton. I'm sure they wouldn't because I know that this person loves Boyz N the Hood. So I think that there is some unfair animosity leveled toward this movie, and I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, and I don't really care. I'm saying tune all that out. If you've never seen this, tune all that out. Go watch Chow Chow Real Smooth, because it's a beautiful film with characters that you'll fall in love with, especially if you feel like you know them or if you feel like you are them. It's a really incredible film. I look forward to the next time Dylan tricks me into watching it. And that brings us to the bonus entry, as promised. But it's not a film. It's a music video. This is another one that comes from a Dylan comment, and the reason it made it into this video is because I didn't know that the filmmaking team Daniels made the music video for Turn Down for What? They Were 25. And so I decided to include it in here, even though it's not a feature film or I mean, music video can be considered a short film, and I do sometimes, depending on what the music video is. You feel free to debate that in the comments if you guys want. I could really go either way on it, but I'll always side with an artist made a film if they say they made a film. That's kind of where I am. Now, I'm sure that a lot of great music videos were directed by people who are under the age of 25 or 25 or under. But when he told me this, it really stuck out to me, because Turn Down for What is not really music that I'm into. But I do remember when the music video came out, because it was one of the most insane things I'd ever seen on screen. There are images from that video that were burned into my brain for the next decade. And as soon as he told me it was directed by Daniels, I was like, of course it was. It's the kind of thing that could only be devised by Daniels, really. But I didn't know who they were at the time. And so I just couldn't see that it was like these artistic, these visionaries, these auteurs who were making it. And I'm sure I should have, but at the time I was really more focused on just the weirdness of it. But I rewatched it. I actually rewatched it a couple times, because not only does it have just some actors in it that I'm like, oh hey, it's that person, and one of the Daniels stars in it, is the main person, the main dancing person, which I believe we call a dancer. There's a lot of people in it that I recognize. It's just also, if you watch it, like there's a very interesting thing happening in it, which there always has been. But when you consider that it is Daniels making it, it kind of contextualizes it a bit for me in a way that makes me understand it a little bit more, which I really dig. I can't tell you what I understand from it now, but I can just say that knowing that did change it a little bit for me, and maybe that's good and maybe that's bad, but it did, and that's just a fact. If you've never seen the Turn Down for What music video by DJ Snake and Lil Jon, is who that song is by, I recommend you go watch it as soon as this video is over, and it's almost over. In fact, it's ending right now. Next week, or rather this week, because I know I'm a day late getting this out. So really this week, we are talking about directors' second and fifth features. I'm going to try to watch both second and fifth features from each director I select. And it is Oscar season, and the death race is on. So I don't know if Oscar prep is going to get in the way of this, but at the very least, I'm going to watch one set of movies from a director. I hope to watch more, but I can only promise one set of movies, and that's all I ever promised. I promised I would watch one that I had never seen before, and there would be at least one movie watched, and which is kind of the same one. So I am going to watch at least one set of movies from a director for this. Hopefully more. We'll see where we are in 6 days. What did you think of the movies that I watched? Were there any that you really loved or maybe didn't love? Have you seen Jeanne Dielman? What did you think about the monotony? Did it bore you, or were you invested as I was? Are there any other movies made by 25-year-old directors or younger that you really love and thought should have been on my list? What are some recommendations you have for me for second and fifth films from specific directors? I mean, there's got to be some that are iconic. It would be really cool if I found one that was incredible and one that was really, really bad as their second and fifth films, depending on in whichever order, to maybe compare that a little bit. I don't know. Talk to me in the comments. Thanks.